Good day, everyone. My name is Isabel Bacolod, and this is my brief discussion on neo-behaviorism by Tolman and Bandura. In this module, we may find ourselves be able to obtain such learnings, such as what is Tolman's purposive behaviorism, what is Bandura's social learning theory, and how we can use these aspects in teaching, or how can we apply this in teaching or even to ourselves. So let us start. With new researchers, explanations provided by the basic principles of behaviorism appeared not to satisfy all learning scenarios. New theories came into view which maintained some of the behaviorist concepts but excluded others, and added new ideas which later came to be associated with the cognitive views of learning. So, in neo behaviorism, it has aspects of behaviorism, but it also reaches out to the cognitive perspective. There are two theories reflecting neo behaviorism that stands up. First is Edward Tolman's purposive behaviorism, and second is Albert Bandura's social learning theory. Both theories are influenced by behaviorism, which is focused on external elements in learning, but their principles seem to also be reflective of the cognitive perspective, or it is more focused on internal elements. Now let us start with Tolman's purposive behaviorism. Purposive behaviorism has also been referred to as sign learning theory and is often seen as the link between behaviorism and cognitive theory. Tolman's theory was founded on two psychological views, those of the Gestalt psychologists and those of John Watson, the behaviorist. Tolman believed that learning is a cognitive process. Learning involves forming beliefs and obtaining knowledge about the environment, and then revealing that knowledge through purposeful or meaningful and goal directed behavior. So, now let us talk about the key concepts or the main ideas in Tolman's purposive behaviorism theory. The first one is learning is always purposive and goal directed. Tolman asserted that learning is always purposive and goal directed. He held the notion that an organism acted or responded for some adaptive purpose. He believed individuals do more than merely respond to stimuli. They act on beliefs, attitudes, changing conditions, and they strive toward goals. Tolman saw the behavior as holistic, purposive, and cognitive. He is saying this that we are not just merely doing an act and just like doing it. It's like we're doing this for a purpose, or we're doing this act for a certain goal. Like for example, where we study. So why do we study? Because we want to pass some tests or some exams, or to finish studying. Am I right? It is just the same with what he stated, that learning is always purposive and goal directed. Now, the second one is cognitive maps. In this concept, this is more likely about the cognitive maps in rats. In his most famous experiment, one group of rats was placed at random starting locations in a maze, but the food was always in the same location. Another group of rats had the food placed in different location in their starting point. Um, the group that had the food in the same location performed much better than the other group, supposedly demonstrating that they had learned the location rather than a specific sequence of turns. This tendency is to learn location signified that rats somehow formed cognitive maps that helped them perform well on the maze. He also found out that organisms will select the shortest or easiest path to achieve a goal. So now, when we apply this in a human learning, since a student passes by the same route going to school every day, he acquires a cognitive map of the location of his school. So when transportation rerouting is done, he can still figure out what turns to make to get to school the shortest or easiest way. Or in other words, we can also say that cognitive maps is like an instinct that we have or we acquire along the way. So the next concept is latent learning. Latent learning is a kind of learning that remains or stays with the individual until needed. It is learning that is not outwardly manifested at once. According to Tolman, it can exist even without reinforcement. He demonstrated this in his rat experiments, wherein rats apparently learned the maze by forming cognitive maps of the maze, but manifested this knowledge of the maze only when they needed to. Applied in human learning, for example, a 2-year-old always sees her dad operate the TV remote control and observes how the TV is turned on or how the channels changed and the volume adjusted. After some time, the parents are surprised that on the first time that their daughter holds the remote control, she already knows which buttons to press for what function. Through latent learning, the child knew the skills beforehand, even though she has never done them before. It is safe to say that we can apply this knowledge just by observing or watching someone do it. So when it is our time to do it, we already know what to do, or we don't even need to practice it because it it's just like when we learn something, we just believed or know that we can do it, and when we do, we actually end up doing it, and that is a good way of learning something. Observing is a good way of learning something. So the last concept is intervening variables. Intervening variables are variables that are not readily seen but serve as determinants of behavior. Tolman believed that learning is mediated or is influenced by expectations, perceptions, um, representations, needs, and other internal or environmental variables. For example, in his experiments with rats, he found out that hunger was an intervening variable. So we can say that. So when we apply or describe this in a human being learning, we can say that why do you think the person finds a way to go to school? So it is safe to say that he wants to go to school or he wants to attend school, so he finds a way on how to get there. Am I right? Or we could say that in the rats, so if the rat was hungry, so he can smell or he can find a way to look for food. So that's how he found his way through the maze to get to the food. So now let us have Albert Bandura's social learning theory. Social learning theory focuses on the learning that occurs within a social context. It considers that people learn from one another, including such concepts as observational learning, imitation, and modeling. For example, we can say that if a child or a person saw something, so they can either observe from it, analyze the situation, or they can imitate it. They can do it on their own, or they can copy whatever that person or that specific situation was doing, or they can model it, you know. People can learn by observing the behavior of others and the outcomes of those behaviors. Learning can occur without a change in behavior. Behaviorists say that learning has to be represented by a permanent change in the behavior. In contrast, social learning theorists say that because people can learn through observation alone, their learning may not necessarily be shown in their performance. Learning may not or may result in a behavior change. Cognition plays a role in learning. Over the last 30 years, social learning theory has become increasingly cognitive in its interpretation of human learning. Awareness and expectations of future reinforcements or punishments can have a major effect on the behaviors that people exhibit. Social learning theory can also be considered a bridge or transition between behaviorist learning theories and cognitive learning theories. So, how can the environment reinforces and punishes modeling? People are often reinforced for modeling the behavior of others. Bandura suggested that the environment also reinforces modeling. This is in several possible ways. First is the observer is reinforced by the model. For example, a student who changes dress to fit in with a certain group of students has a strong likelihood of being accepted and thus reinforced by that group. Second, the observer is reinforced by a third person. An example of this is that the observer might be modeling the actions of someone else. For example, an outstanding class leader or student, the teacher notices this and compliments and praises the observer for modeling such behavior, thus reinforcing that behavior. The third one is the imitated behavior itself leads to reinforcing consequences. Many behaviors that we learn from others produce satisfying or reinforcing results. For example, a student in my multimedia class could observe how the extra work a classmate does is fun. This student, in turn, would do the same extra work and also experience enjoyment. And the fourth one, consequences of the model's behavior affect the observer's behavior vicariously. This is known as vicarious reinforcement. Um, this is where the model is reinforced for a response, and then the observer shows an increase in that same response. Bandura illustrated this by having students watch a film of a model hitting an inflated clown doll. One group of children saw the model being praised for such action. Without being reinforced, the group of children began to also hit the doll. And now, the last thing that we are going to talk about is the conditions necessary for effective modeling to occur. Bandura mentions four conditions that are necessarily before an individual can successfully model the behavior of someone else. So we have these four aspects. First is attention, second is retention, third is motor reproduction, and fourth is motivations. So in attention, the person must first pay attention to the model. This is the first step in having an effective modeling. The second one is retention. The observer must be able to remember the behavior that has been observed. One way of increasing this is using the technique of rehearsal. So this is like practicing or um, engaging ourselves first with self retention that so that we can successfully achieve modeling. The third is motor reproduction. The third condition is the ability to replicate the behavior that the model has just demonstrated. This means that the observer has to be able to replicate the action, which could be a problem with a learner who is not ready developmentally to replicate the action. Um, so, for example, little children have difficulty doing complex physical motion. So, We can an exercise in school or a dancing platform in school, so that young children aren't that much developed with moving their bodies accordingly. So with this, they can still effectively model the specific dance steps that they need to follow. This just needs m- this just needs a little push for them to successfully achieve this. And the last one is motivation. The final and necessary ingredient for modeling to occur is motivation. Learners must want to demonstrate what they have learned. Remember that since these four conditions vary among individuals, different people will reproduce the same behavior differently. So, with motivation, they can obtain and acquire such effective modeling if they are willing enough, or when if they have this willingness within them to actually perform and do these certain actions and learning. So that is all for this report, and I mean this lesson, and I hope that you learned something or even just a little bit with my brief discussion. Thank you and have a nice day.